Hello everyone. Before we dive in, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're from and what time you're watching. This helps YouTube show you more stories like this one. Now let's get started. I was driving to work early on a Saturday morning. The sun still low enough that the sky had that pale blue color between night and day. The interstate was quieter than usual. Just a few scattered cars spread across the 3 lanes. I remember thinking how smooth the drive felt, how the road almost seemed empty in front of me. I stayed in the middle lane out of habit, letting my mind slowly wake up as the miles went by. It felt like any other morning, nothing strange, nothing out of place. I wasn't even fully aware yet, just going through the routine I had gone through so many times. I glanced into my left side mirror without thinking, the way you do when you've been driving long enough that it becomes automatic. At first, it looked like just another car coming up behind me, but something about the speed caught my eye. It was moving fast, much faster than the rest of the traffic. I watched it for a few seconds as it kept closing the distance, the shape growing larger in the mirror until it pulled into the far left lane and sped past me. I turned my head slightly as it came up beside me. It was a dark coupe, maybe mid-2000s. Nothing that stood out, but what I saw in the back seat made my stomach drop like a weight. A woman was pressed against the rear window. Her face was red and strained, her hands slapping against the glass. She was screaming, her mouth wide open, but I couldn't hear anything through the rush of wind and the hum of the road. Her hair was a mess, sticking to her face. Her eyes locked onto mine for a moment that felt strangely long. That single moment hit me harder than anything I'd expected to see that morning. There was fear in her face, real fear, the kind you don't mistake for anything else. The car pulled ahead of me, but something took over. Some instinct I didn't even recognize at first. I pressed on the gas and moved into their lane, getting closer until I was right behind them. The woman saw me again through the rear window, pounding harder now, her mouth forming the same word over and over even though I couldn't hear it. She leaned toward the side as if trying to avoid something, and that's when I saw the man driving reach his arm back and swing at her. He wasn't trying to quiet her. He was hitting her hard. My heart was pounding so loud I could hear it in my ears. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my hands shaking but still holding the wheel steady. The dispatcher answered and I tried to explain what I was seeing, giving them the make and model of the car, the lane we were in, the mile marker passing by. While I talked, the man must have noticed me following him. He suddenly jerked the wheel and shifted directly in front of my car, cutting me off so close I had to brake. Then he slammed on his brakes and came to a complete stop in the middle of the interstate. For a second I froze. The road around us was almost empty, but the silence of that moment felt unreal. I didn't know if he had a weapon. I didn't know if he was going to get out and come toward me. My mind raced through 100 possibilities in one heartbeat. I couldn't sit there. I swung into the right lane, passed him fast, and took the next exit. My chest felt tight, my palms slippery with sweat, my mind telling me to leave it alone, that this wasn't my problem. But something in me refused to let it go. I told the dispatcher I wasn't done and looped back up the ramp, waiting until he had passed the overpass, before merging onto the interstate again. I spotted the dark coupe far ahead, weaving between cars and speeding up, way beyond what felt safe. I pushed my car faster, feeling the engine strain as I tried to keep up. At times we were going close to 100 miles per hour, dodging slow drivers, switching lanes without warning. And every second felt stretched and sharpened like I was trapped inside the moment. The woman's face stayed in my mind the whole time. It wasn't just fear, it was desperation. The kind that comes when you think you're almost out of time. The dispatcher stayed on the line with me the entire chase. They told me officers were setting up ahead, trying to get into place. But the coupe kept darting through traffic so unpredictably that it was hard for anyone to get in front of him. I followed him for what felt like forever, though later I realized it was around 30 miles. 30 miles of pushing my car harder than I ever had, of feeling every vibration of the engine, every twitch of the steering wheel, of trying to keep my eyes on him, even when he disappeared behind big trucks or around slight bends in the road. Eventually he started pulling even farther ahead, the distance slowly widening, no matter how much I tried to keep up. The dispatcher told me to stay on the line, to keep giving updates when I could still see him. But eventually his car became smaller and smaller until I could no longer make it out from the rest of the traffic up ahead. It felt like failing, like everything I'd been doing was for nothing. But the dispatcher kept talking calmly, saying officers were in position, saying they had everything they needed. 10 minutes later, while I was still driving, still shaking a little, the dispatcher said officers had located the vehicle and had stopped it. I drove until I saw the lights flashing in the distance. I slowed down as I approached, pulling into the far left lane so I could see everything clearly. There he was, the driver, lying face down on the ground in handcuffs, police kneeling beside him. The woman was sitting on the guardrail a short distance away, her hands covering her face, her shoulders shaking. I didn't stop or get out. I just kept driving, passing the scene slowly, my heart sinking as the whole reality settled in. Later I found out that the woman was his ex. He had abducted her and was taking her somewhere she didn't want to go. Somewhere no one could say for sure. Thinking about what he might have been planning still sends a cold feeling through my chest. I didn't know her, and she didn't know me. But that moment on the interstate connected us in a way I can't explain. It made the world feel darker, made me realize how easily something terrible can happen right in front of you without warning. That drive should have been like any other Saturday morning. Instead, it turned into something that stayed with me long after it was over. I still think about the look in her eyes when I first saw her banging on that window. I still think about how close she came to disappearing forever. And I still think about how fast everything can change. How one moment of paying attention can make all the difference between someone being lost and someone being saved. I was driving alone through the flat, dark stretch of highway that cut through the Midwest, the kind of road where the world feels too wide and too empty at the same time. It was around 10:30 at night, the sky completely black except for a few thin stars scattered above the fields. The air felt colder than usual, sharp enough to sting through the cracked window. I had been staring forward for so long that my eyes had started to blur everything together. The yellow lines, the faint red glow of the 3 cars ahead of me, the endless dark horizon. Everything had fallen into that strange rhythm you get on late night drives where time feels stretched and unreal. I wasn't expecting anything to break that calm. I wasn't even really awake in the full sense. My brain was stuck halfway between focus and autopilot. That's probably why, at first, I didn't react when something bright flashed in the corner of my vision. For a split second I thought it was a firework, maybe someone messing around out on a farm or celebrating something random. The brightness had that same quick flare that fireworks have, but something about it felt wrong. Too fast, too sharp, too controlled. Fireworks don't cut across the sky in a straight line. I turned my head and that moment burned itself permanently into my mind. A bright green ball was ripping across the sky like someone had drawn a line of neon paint across the darkness. It wasn't just green. It was this intense, almost electric green. The kind of color nothing natural should have. It was moving so fast that the trail behind it blurred into one long streak. But the front of it, the core, was perfectly round, glowing, almost pulsing. My stomach dropped hard, like I'd just stepped off a ledge. I felt this sudden cold fear rush through my chest. The thought hit me so fast it didn't even feel like my own. I hope I don't die right now. I hope this isn't a warhead, or a massive meteor strike. My brain raced through every movie scene of an explosion wiping out a city, every disaster documentary I'd ever half-watched. For a second I genuinely believed that the world was about to end, and that I was going to be sitting in my car in the middle of some empty highway when it happened. The thing kept falling, crossing from one end of the horizon to the other in a long, terrifying arc. It didn't disappear quickly like a shooting star. It stayed. It lasted for what felt like forever. Probably several long seconds, but the kind of seconds where your heart is hitting your ribs so hard you feel every beat. The light reflected off the hood of my car and the road ahead, turning everything around me a faint green. I felt the skin on my arms prickle and tighten. It didn't make a sound, which somehow made it even worse. Just silent, bright, fast, and huge. When it finally started to fade, it didn't vanish instantly. It dimmed slowly, flickering almost like it was burning itself out. Then it just kind of dissolved into the sky, leaving nothing behind except the after image burned into my eyes. For a moment I just sat there frozen, staring at the empty sky and gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were aching. My breath felt stuck in my chest, like my lungs had forgotten how to work. I didn't even realize I had drifted toward the shoulder, until the front tire hit the rumble strip and the car shook. I pulled over, more out of instinct than thought. The 3 cars ahead of me had all pulled over too, but I didn't notice them at first. I was too stuck in the shock of what I'd just seen. The world felt too quiet again. Almost painfully quiet, like everything was waiting for something else to happen. I stepped out of the car and the cold hit me immediately. The sky looked normal again, black and empty, as if nothing had cut through it just seconds before. For a moment I wondered if I'd imagined it. Sometimes your brain fills in things on long drives, especially when you're tired. But then I noticed the other cars, all lined up along the shoulder, all facing forward like mine. None of them were moving. No headlights shifting. No engines humming, just sitting there, like every driver had been struck still at the exact same time. That was the moment the reality of it hit me. If it had been just me, maybe I would have doubted myself. But seeing those cars, knowing those people had seen the exact same thing, it anchored the whole experience in place. It made it real in a way that left a strange heaviness in my chest. After a minute or so, one of the cars slowly pulled back onto the road, then the next. Then the third. I got back in my car and did the same. The odd thing was, none of us sped up, or slowed down or tried to drive differently. We all just drifted back into our original positions, like we were still half in shock and half pretending everything was normal. The rest of the drive felt surreal. Every few minutes I'd glance at the sky, expecting another green light to cut through it. My mind kept replaying the moment, the exact angle, the exact brightness, the way the fear had surged through me before I had time to think. I kept imagining what would have happened if it hadn't burned up. If it had been bigger. If it had landed closer. It made the road feel even darker than before, like the world had been quiet for too long, and something had finally reminded us how fragile everything really is. Later that night, when I finally got home, I checked the news immediately. I needed proof that it wasn't something my tired mind had cooked up. That's when I saw it. Reports from 3 surrounding states. People saying they'd seen a bright green meteor streak across the sky. People describing the same color, the same direction, the same slow burn out. And then the final line, it had landed in Minnesota, a whole state away from where I'd been driving. No one had been hurt. No damage, no explosion, just a meteor, probably rich in copper, glowing bright green as it tore through the atmosphere. Reading that should have calmed me, but instead it deepened the weird feeling in my chest. The idea that something that huge had passed so close overhead, close enough to light up the sky and make me believe, even just for a heartbeat, that I might die right there on the highway, and that it kept going. that it crossed entire states before hitting the ground, carrying all that speed and heat and weight. Even now, I still think about how small I felt watching it fall, how the world suddenly felt bigger than I could understand, how the fear came out of nowhere, sharp and pure, like an instinct older than any logic, and how, for a few seconds, the sky looked alive in a way I'd never seen before. Nothing supernatural happened that night. No monsters, no strange voices, just a meteor crossing the sky. But the truth is, sometimes the real things, the natural things, hit you harder than anything made up. Sometimes the sky splits open for a few seconds, and you realize how thin the line really is between normal life and something that could change everything. That night didn't end in disaster, and no one was hurt, but it changed the way I look at the sky. I still drive that same stretch sometimes, and every time I do, I catch myself glancing upward, half expecting to see another streak of green cutting through the darkness. And every time, the memory comes back clear, sharp, and cold. The way the night air felt when I stepped out of my car and realized I wasn't the only one who saw it. I was more tired than I wanted to admit that morning. The sky was still that dull blue, gray that comes right before sunrise, the kind that makes everything look a little washed out and unreal. The highway ran along the side of a mountain valley, twisting back and forth with long empty stretches followed by sharp bends. The air outside was cold enough that the windows had a thin fog on the edges, and every few minutes I wiped the inside with my sleeve without thinking about it. My friend sat beside me, half awake, staring out at the faint line of dawn pushing over the ridge. The road was completely empty. No headlights behind us, no taillights in front of us. It felt like the whole valley was still asleep. The engine hummed quietly, steady and low, and I kept my hands loose on the wheel. We were just talking about nothing important. It was one of those slow early morning talks you barely remember, where both people speak softly without thinking about it. The cold air slipping in through the vents kept me alert enough, and the steady curves in the highway forced me to focus. The world felt calm, too calm for a place built from steep cliffs and long drops. At one point I leaned back a little and adjusted the mirror out of habit. My eyes caught something I didn't expect. A pair of headlights appeared far behind us, small at first, then growing in size faster than I could register. I blinked hard. They were coming at a speed that didn't match the empty quiet of the morning. The road was straight for that part, so I kept watching the lights, thinking maybe my eyes were playing tricks. But no, they were getting bigger and brighter at a rate that made my chest tighten. I kept turning my head slightly, checking the mirror again and again. The car behind us wasn't just speeding, it was flying. The distance between us disappeared in seconds. My heartbeat jumped so fast I could feel it in my throat. It wasn't just fast, it was too fast for someone to control on a road that twisted every half mile. The driver didn't drift left or right. They didn't slow down. They didn't try to change lanes. It was like they didn't even see us. I felt the air in my lungs freeze for a moment. My hands tightened on the wheel, and I held it straight without breathing. I could feel the pressure building inside me, like I was waiting for a crash that was already decided. The headlights behind us were so bright now that the interior of my car filled with white light. The sides of the window frames glowed. My skin tingled. My stomach felt like it dropped down into my legs. Then everything happened fast. The other car reached our bumper so suddenly I didn't even have time to think. At the last second, my friend shifted in their seat, and their body moved just enough that the car drifted slightly toward the right side of the lane. That tiny, almost unconscious movement changed everything. Because right when we edged right, the car behind us jerked left in a violent motion, like someone woke up too late and realized they were about to slam into us. The sound of tires scraping the edge of the road echoed sharp and clear, cutting through the quiet morning. The other car shot toward the ditch, so fast I couldn't even track the whole motion. It vanished completely over the edge, swallowed by the drop on the side of the highway. My breath stopped in my chest. My fingers clenched around the wheel so tightly my knuckles hurt. Then, a second later, the car exploded upward from the ditch like something thrown by a giant hand. It launched at least 4 or 5 feet into the air, maybe more, its whole body rising above the edge of the road. Dirt and broken weeds burst up under it. The bottom of the car flashed silver as sunlight caught it for a second. The tires hit the pavement with a hard and ugly thump that shook the ground beneath us. But somehow the driver kept control. The car bounced once, swayed hard, then shot forward again onto the highway, almost seamlessly, like the ditch and the jump hadn't happened. The speed was insane. The driver accelerated even more, pushing the car to maybe 140 km/h, maybe more. It surged past us and kept going until the headlights grew smaller and smaller ahead, eventually becoming just 2 faint dots before disappearing around a bend. The whole valley went silent again, but the silence felt wrong now, like the air was holding its breath. I didn't speak. I couldn't. My friend didn't say anything either. It was like both of us had been hit with the same shock at the same moment. My chest felt tight, and my hands were shaking on the wheel. I kept driving, but my eyes stayed pinned to the road with a focus I had never felt before. Every small movement of the car felt sharp, like I was too aware of every inch of the tires touching the road. Minutes passed but felt longer. The quiet inside the car was thick. I kept replaying the moment in my head. The light behind us growing too fast, the sharp swerve, the car disappearing, the impossible jump back onto the highway. My mind tried to make sense of it, and the only thing that felt even partly logical was that the driver must have fallen asleep. Maybe they woke up right before hitting us. Maybe the panic made them yank the wheel toward the ditch. Maybe adrenaline blurred their judgment afterward, so they sped away from the danger instead of slowing down. But even then, it didn't fully make sense. The ditch was deep enough that any normal car should have rolled or slammed into something. The jump back onto the highway felt unreal. The way they sped off without stopping or slowing down felt even stranger. It was like they didn't even process what had happened. We drove for miles after that without seeing a single other car, no one ahead of us, no one behind us. Just the long winding highway and the early morning light slowly creeping across the valley. By the time the sun rose over the mountains, the event already felt distant, like a dream that left a cold weight in my stomach. But it wasn't a dream. It happened right in front of us, in a place where no one else was around to see it. No witnesses. No other headlights. No signs of anyone. Even now, when I think about it, I still feel that same cold shock I felt in the moment. The empty road, the sudden blur of lights, the impossible jump, and the silence that followed us for the rest of the drive. It was one of those moments that felt unreal while it happened, but stayed with me long after. A reminder of how thin the line is between normal life and disaster, and how sometimes the most terrifying things are the ones that happen in the real world with no explanation at all. I grew up in New England, the kind of place where the cold does most of the dirty work for you. Winters were long, springs were muddy, and summers were humid just enough to remind you that nature was still in charge. But one thing I always appreciated was how the cold kept the creepy stuff away. No giant spiders, no desert scorpions, nothing with fangs or armor-plated bodies. Just regular bugs, simple and harmless. At least that's what I thought. We did get moths though. Everyone in New England has a story about a moth flying into their face on a summer night or bouncing off a porch light like it was drunk. Some people claimed they'd seen huge ones, the kind that look like they belong in a rainforest. I always figured they were exaggerating, the same way people talk about fish they almost caught. I had never seen one bigger than a couple inches, and even those were the type you could gently scoop into your hand and release without freaking out. I didn't think much about it. Around that time, I had only been driving for 2 months. I was still getting used to the responsibility of having my own license, and I had this old, beat-up car my parents helped me buy. It had hand-crank windows, the kind you had to turn forever just to get a small breeze. The ceiling fabric sagged in the back seat from age, and the vents smelled faintly like wet leaves no matter how many times I cleaned them. The engine rattled every time I hit a pothole. But it worked, and that was what mattered. It got me where I needed to go. One late afternoon, I was on the highway heading home from a friend's place. The sun was starting to drop behind the trees, and the sky had that deep orange glow that only lasts a few minutes. Traffic was light. The air in the car felt warm and stuffy, so I had the fan on full blast. I remember feeling relaxed, even proud of myself for finally feeling comfortable driving at highway speed. I had music playing low, not loud enough to be distracting, just enough to fill the emptiness of the car. Then I heard it. At first it sounded like something brushing against the roof of the car, a soft fluttering mixed with a tapping noise. I thought it was something outside, maybe debris hitting the exterior as I drove, but the sound didn't match the rhythm of the wind. It was too close, too sharp, and it came in bursts. I glanced in the rearview mirror, and for a split second, I thought I saw a shadow dart across the back seat, but the car vibrated a little, and I convinced myself it was nothing. The noise came again, louder this time, like something was actually flying around inside the car. I felt a jolt of confusion. My mind went straight to the worst possible guess. A bird had somehow gotten inside. I gripped the steering wheel tighter. I tried to keep my eyes on the road, but the sound behind me made the hairs on my arms stand up. I risked a quick look over my shoulder. That's when I saw it. It was clinging to the fabric on the back seat like some kind of nightmare decoration. A moth, but not the kind I grew up brushing off porch lights. This thing was huge, bigger than my hand. Its wings were mottled dark brown and gray, thick and heavy looking instead of delicate. Its legs were long, jointed, and moved slowly, almost like fingers testing the air. Everything about it felt wrong. It looked like something from a different place entirely. My throat tightened and my heartbeat slammed against my chest. I turned back toward the highway, just as it launched itself off the seat. The sound of its wings filled the car, rough and heavy, like someone shaking a paper bag. I felt the air move around me as it flew right past my head. Every instinct in my body told me to pull over, to stop, to get out, but I was already at 60 and there were cars behind me. If I slammed on the brakes, I could cause a pileup. I had to stay steady. I had to keep control. The moth circled in front of me, banging into the passenger window, then bouncing off the dashboard. I tightened my grip on the wheel so hard my knuckles went white. My breathing turned shallow. I tried to lean back while staying in my lane, but there was nowhere to go. The space felt too small for both of us. I could feel the heat of panic spread through my chest. Then it landed, right on the dashboard, inches from my hand. Its legs gripped the plastic surface like it was holding on for dear life. For a moment it just sat there, still except for the twitching of its antennae. I stared at it while trying to keep one eye on the road. The car swerved slightly, and I forced myself to correct it. I could not crash because of a moth, no matter how monstrous it looked. My mind was racing so fast I felt dizzy. But before I could even think of what to do, it launched itself again. And this time, it hit my face. Its wings slapped against my cheek and forehead. And the feeling of those long legs brushing my skin made my stomach drop. I jerked backward instinctively. I let out a raw, terrified scream, the kind that came from somewhere deep and uncontrollable. The car wobbled again and I fought hard not to lose control. My hands shook on the steering wheel. It kept hitting me, flying in confused circles, bouncing off the window, the wheel, the seat, everywhere. I reached for the window crank and twisted it as fast as I could, but the stupid old mechanism barely moved. My hands were shaking so badly the handles slipped. I tried again, cranking one side open enough to get air moving, Wind rushed into the car, loud and cold. The moth veered toward it, then away as if confused by the sudden change. I kept steering with one hand, cranking with the other, the whole car vibrating. Finally, during one wild loop, it shot straight toward the open window. It hovered for a second, then the airflow caught its wings and pulled it out into the highway wind. It was gone in an instant. I kept driving for another mile, before I even realized my hands were still shaking. My heart felt like it was still trying to climb out of my chest. I finally pulled off at a rest stop and sat there in the parking lot with the engine running, trying to get my breathing under control. My shirt stuck to my back with sweat. My arms felt weak. The whole car still felt tainted by the presence of that thing, like it had left some invisible pressure behind. I stayed there for a long time, just staring out the windshield, replaying the moment it hit my face over and over again. It felt unreal, but at the same time too vivid to forget. The rough sound of its wings, the weight of it, the way its legs moved. I kept checking the seats and the floor just to make sure nothing else was in the car. Eventually I drove home slower than usual, keeping all the windows cracked even though the air was cold by then. When I parked and finally stepped out, my legs felt shaky. I didn't tell my parents the full story, because I knew they'd laugh or think I was being dramatic. But the truth is it shook me more than I expected. You don't think something as simple as a moth can push you that close to losing control until it happens. Even now, years later, I still can't stand the sound of fluttering inside a room. If something brushes my face unexpectedly, I tense up without thinking, and every time I drive at night with the windows down, even just a crack, I catch myself glancing into the back seat. It's strange how something so small, something people barely notice, can leave a mark that stays with you long after it's gone. I was on my way home that afternoon, driving along the long stretch of highway that cuts through the fields outside town. It was one of those dry, dull days where the sky looks pale and empty and everything feels slowed down. I remember thinking how quiet the road was, barely any cars ahead of me. Just the sound of the wind pushing against the windows. That's when I saw him. At first I only noticed movement on the shoulder, just a quick shift like someone bending down. When I got closer, I saw a man standing near the edge of the asphalt. He looked filthy, dust all over his clothes, hair stuck to his forehead. Before I could even process it, he stepped forward like he was about to cross the road. Then he didn't cross. He jumped. Straight into the lane, right in front of a passing truck. The truck blasted its horn and swerved so hard the trailer almost tipped. The man jumped back at the last second and tumbled into the ditch. I remember braking hard and just sitting there, shaking. I didn't get out. I didn't want to go near him. I didn't know if he was dangerous or drunk or high or sick or all of that at once. I called the cops from the car. Told them exactly where I was. Told them what I'd seen. Told them the guy looked like he was trying to die. They said they'd send someone. I waited a couple minutes, watching the ditch, but the man didn't come back up. Maybe he was lying down there staring at me. Maybe he had crawled deeper into the thick bushes. I couldn't tell. No other cars slowed down. Everyone just kept driving like it was nothing. Eventually I pulled back onto the road and left. I didn't hear anything else about it. No follow-up, no alert, nothing. I assumed the cops came by, didn't see him, and just shrugged it off. By the time evening came, the whole thing felt like something my brain had exaggerated because I was tired. It sat in the back of my mind like a memory I didn't want to think about, but still kept revisiting. That night, a few hours later, I was at home when my phone buzzed. It was a message saying there'd been an accident on the highway. I didn't think anything of it. That road had crashes all the time. People sped through without paying attention, and the curves caught a lot of drivers off guard. I only started paying attention when another message came in saying my friend was involved. He had been driving his wife and kids into town for dinner. I grabbed my keys and rushed out. The drive back to the highway felt unreal. The sun was long gone and the sky was black and empty. The road looked completely different at night. The streetlights didn't reach far, leaving big patches of darkness where everything disappeared. When I got close, I saw the blue and red lights flashing far ahead, bouncing off the pavement and the metal guardrails. I parked on the gravel shoulder and walked the last bit. The air smelled like burnt rubber and something sharp I couldn't place at first. When I stepped closer, I realized it was blood. Not a lot, not a puddle, but a smell you can't mistake once you know it. The officers had already blocked off the area. There were pieces of something on the asphalt, small dark smears scattered across the lane. I didn't want to look too closely. My friend was off to the side, sitting against the front of his car with his head in his hands. His wife stood nearby with the kids, all shaken but physically fine. The front of their car was dented in, the bumper cracked, the hood slightly lifted like something had rolled across it. The other car involved had pulled over on the opposite side. Headlights from both sides made the whole space feel harsh and exposed. The officers were walking up and down the ditch with flashlights. At first I thought they were still looking for something they hadn't found yet. Then I heard one of them say they had already confirmed the body. What was left of it, at least. They didn't say much else, but I didn't need details. I knew. I knew before anyone said a word to me. It was the same man, the same exact stretch of highway, the same ditch he had dropped into earlier that day, the same desperate, frantic way he jumped out, like he wasn't trying to scare anyone, but just trying to end his own misery in the most violent way possible. My friend hadn't seen him. Another car's headlights were coming from the opposite direction, bright and blinding, and for a second they washed over everything. In that second, the man climbed out of the ditch again, using that darkness between the headlights to hide himself until he was right in front of the car. There was no chance to stop at that speed. My friend hit him at around 100 km. The force threw the man forward and dragged him across the road until he wasn't even recognizable anymore. I stood there in the cold air, staring at the same ditch I had stared at earlier that day. It felt unreal that the man had been there the whole time, hiding, waiting, or maybe struggling with himself until something finally broke inside him. I kept thinking about how I had seen him, how I had reported him, how nothing came from it, how close everything had been to ending differently if anyone had taken it seriously. The guilt didn't come all at once. It settled slowly, like dust, coating everything I thought about for days after. My friend couldn't sleep for months. The crash replayed in his head every time he closed his eyes. He told me he would see the road, the headlights, the sudden shape appearing out of nowhere. He kept feeling the impact even when he was awake. His kids were scared to even drive at night anymore. His wife barely talked about it. I went back to the highway once, about a week later. The road looked normal again. No stains, no marks, no sign that someone had died there. Cars flew past like nothing had ever happened. The ditch was quiet. I stood there for a long time staring into it, trying to make sense of the fact that I had seen the beginning of that man's last day, and still couldn't do anything to stop the end of it. I kept replaying every moment. How he looked. How he moved. How he vanished into that ditch like he belonged underground. I kept thinking about how nothing was done, how he didn't get any help, how he slipped between all the cracks because the system decided he wasn't worth more than a quick drive by. The part that haunts me the most isn't the crash or the blood, or even the sight of the ditch. It's the thought that he was alive in there for hours after I drove away. Alive, hidden, waiting for the right moment to throw himself into someone else's life and destroy it in an instant. It made me realize something I never really understood before. Some people don't die alone. They pull others into their ending without meaning to, dragging them into years of guilt and nightmares. And sometimes you see it coming, and you still can't stop it. That's what stays with me even now. That one day, one random drive, one moment of hesitation, can change everything for people who never even saw it coming. And no matter how much I replay it, no matter how much I wish I had done more, the ending never changes. I was in high school when it happened, but the memory still feels close, like it's sitting right behind me waiting to tap my shoulder. Back then, nights didn't feel dangerous. They felt open, wide, and stupid in the best way. Me and two friends used to hop in an old beat-up car and drive the rural roads outside town, surrounded by nothing but endless cornfields and the smell of dirt that carried through the open windows. There were no streetlights out there, no traffic, just a narrow strip of pavement cutting through miles of land, where you could drive for 20 minutes without seeing a single house. It was the kind of quiet that made your ears ring. We were doing the usual stuff that teenagers think makes them invincible. A little drinking, a little weed. The music playing low so we wouldn't attract attention, even though we were miles from anyone. The air inside the car felt warm from our breath, and the heater that only worked on one setting. I remember leaning back in my seat, staring out into the dark rows of corn, as they slipped by like black walls. Every now and then an old farmhouse would show itself off in the distance, sitting far from the road with a single yard light glowing like a tiny star. Those lights always made me feel safe, even though they were so far away. Like they meant other humans were nearby. We had been driving for maybe an hour when it happened. The night had that heavy kind of stillness where you notice every little thing. The hum of the tires, the low rattle of something in the back seat, the faint clicking noise the heater made each time it shifted. I wasn't even paying attention to the road. I was staring down at my hands, feeling the warm buzz in my fingers, when one of the guys in the back moved a little, shaking the car just enough to bring me back. That's when the light showed up behind us. At first it was small, like someone far back had flipped their high beams on. I thought it was a normal car approaching, maybe some local farmer heading home late. But it grew too quickly. Way too quickly. In a few seconds the entire back window was nothing but white. It filled every corner of the glass. It wasn't the kind of brightness you get from headlights either. It was fuller, thicker, almost like it had weight to it. My vision went soft around the edges, like I was looking through water. The inside of the car lit up so completely that I could see everything. Every detail on the dashboard, the wrinkles in the fabric seats, the dust floating in the air. I could see my friends' faces as clear as if someone had turned on a camera flash that didn't end. Their eyes were wide and shining. I could even see the tiny reflections in their pupils. For a moment none of us moved. There was no sound except the tires rolling under us. No engine behind us, no siren, nothing to match the light swallowing us whole. The brightness felt too close. It wasn't behind us anymore. It was on us, around us, like we had driven straight into it. And then it disappeared, not slowly fading out, not drifting away like a car turning off onto another road. It was just gone in an instant, as if someone cut power to the entire world. 1 second we were drowned in white, and the next the darkness crashed back in so hard it made my chest tighten. The road ahead of us was empty. The fields were black again. The only light came from our own headlights, weak and narrow, not even reaching far into the corn. The sudden silence felt heavier than the light had. No engine behind us. No glow in the distance. No dust still settling in the air. Just that deep rural quiet that makes you feel like you're the last person alive. I remember the way the car felt after that. Like it was lighter, almost floating. None of us said a word. No one even moved much. We just kept driving because stopping didn't feel like an option. Stopping felt like asking for the light to come back. Every house we passed after that seemed abandoned, even if it wasn't. The window of each farmhouse looked dark and hollow, and every yard light looked dimmer than before, like the world itself had lost power. When we finally saw the first town sign, I felt my whole body relax, like I had been holding my breath for the last 30 minutes. We pulled into someone's driveway just to gather ourselves. The sky looked normal again. The headlights looked normal. My own reflection in the car window looked normal. But something in the air felt wrong, like a leftover charge from whatever we had gone through. My skin felt tight, like the cold night was pressing against it harder than usual. Even the silence felt different, like the world was listening. For years afterward, I tried to make sense of it. I told myself it had to be some kind of mistake, some kind of weird vehicle we didn't know about, or maybe a reflection of something we couldn't see. But I've never experienced light like that again. I've never seen anything move that fast, appear that suddenly, or disappear without even a trace. It's been 25 years now, and I can still picture every second of that moment. The brightness swallowing the car. My friends' faces glowing like they were lit from inside. The sharp return of darkness. The empty road. The feeling that something had passed through us, or over us, or around us, and used us like a path. Sometimes when I go back to my hometown, I run into one of the guys who was with me that night. We don't bring it up right away. It usually slips out after a while, when our wives have wandered off, or when the conversation turns quiet. We look at each other, and we both know we're remembering the same thing at the same time. Our wives laugh when they hear it, call it our crazy stoner story from back when we were idiots. But the funny thing is, the more they laugh, the more serious it feels to me. I can still feel the brightness on my skin. I can still feel the moment the dark slammed back in. And every time I drive a rural road at night, even now long after high school, I keep my eyes on the rearview mirror a little longer than I need to, just in case that light decides to come back. I was pretty young when it happened, around 6 or 7, small enough that the world still felt too big and too dark when the sun went down. We lived deep in rural Alabama, the kind of place where the nearest neighbor was a speck of light half a mile away, and the woods behind the house swallowed sound like it was hungry. Nights were always filled with the same noises: crickets, frogs, the occasional dog barking somewhere far off. That was normal. That was home. I remember being shaken awake by my mom in the middle of the night. Her movements were fast, sharp, nothing like how she usually woke me. She didn't say a word. She just pulled a jacket on me, grabbed her keys, and led me out into the cold air. I didn't understand why, but I could feel something was wrong. Kids can sense that kind of thing even when they don't know the details. The long drive through the back roads felt endless, and the deeper we went, the more uneasy I got. My older brother lived even farther from town than we did. At that age, I barely understood what was going on, but later I learned the truth. He had been threatening to hurt himself, and my mother was racing over to stop him. All I knew then was that the night felt heavier than usual. When we reached his place, my mom parked right in the yard and told me to stay in the car. She left the keys in the ignition. Door cracked open just enough to let cold air in. I sat there alone, staring at the dark tree line, listening for anything that sounded strange. The house was dark except for one window glowing faintly. Everything outside was still. Too still. Even now, I remember how tight my chest felt, like something was watching me from the woods, even though I couldn't see a thing. She came back out after what felt like forever. Her face looked pale in the porch light. She didn't say a word. She just started the car, turned us around, and drove off. The tires kicked gravel behind us as the house got smaller and smaller in the mirror. I sat in the back seat, staring out the rear window, just watching the road unwind behind us. That was when I first noticed the lights. 2 bright beams, but they were higher than any car headlights I had ever seen. At first I thought it had to be an 18-wheeler, even though I knew trucks didn't come down this road at night. It didn't make sense, but that was the only thing my young mind could come up with. The lights got closer. Too fast. I remember thinking the driver wasn't going to stop in time. It looked like it was about to plow right through us. I gripped the seat with both hands, bracing myself. The inside of the car lit up like somebody was shining a floodlight directly through the windows. The brightness didn't feel normal. It wasn't just headlights. It was too clean, too wide, too white. My mom kept checking the rearview mirror, then the side mirror, then turning halfway around to look out the back window. Her breathing changed, shallow and fast, and even as a kid, I could tell she was scared in a way I had never seen before. That alone made my stomach twist. She told me to get on the floor of the back seat and cover my head. I did lie down, but I didn't cover my head. I kept peeking over the edge of the seat, staring at the light coming up behind us. It washed through the car so bright that I could see the dust floating in the air like tiny sparks. My mom pressed the gas harder and harder. The engine groaned. The tires bumped over every crack in the road, but those lights stayed right behind us. No sound of an engine, no sound of tires, just the glow swallowing every shadow inside the car. Then suddenly she hit the brakes. My body jerked forward, and I smacked my shoulder on the back of the front seat, but I scrambled up enough to look. The lights passed right over us, not around us, over us. The entire interior of the car turned white, like we were sitting inside a giant bulb. The roof above me lit up like it was made of thin paper. She stopped the car dead in the middle of the road. I don't know how long we sat there, but it felt like time got stretched out. The brightness covered everything, turning the world outside into a glowing void. I couldn't even see the trees or the road or the sky. It was like the whole world had disappeared except for us and that light. And then it was gone, not faded. Gone like someone flipped a switch. The road went black again in an instant. My ears rang from the sudden silence, and it wasn't normal silence, not rural night silence. It was absolute nothing. No crickets, no frogs, no wind brushing the leaves. The kind of quiet that makes your heartbeat sound too loud. I rolled down the window because the air felt heavy and hot. I leaned out and looked around. Everything was so dark it almost didn't look real. It felt like the world had paused, and we were the only living things left in it. My mom didn't move. She just stared straight ahead at the empty road, hands still locked around the steering wheel. I wanted to ask what happened, but I didn't. Something in me understood I wasn't supposed to speak. Not then. After a long stretch of silence, she finally put the car back in gear, and we continued home. The noise of the engine felt wrong in that dead quiet, like it wasn't supposed to break whatever had happened to the world around us. The woods stayed silent all the way back to our house. Not a single sound. My mom has never talked about that night, not once. Even now, if I bring it up, she shuts down immediately. I used to think maybe my memory was twisted because I was a kid, but every time I replay it in my head, it feels too clear to be imagination. That bright light, that silence afterward. The way the world felt like it dropped out from under us for those few minutes. And the strangest part is that sometimes, driving those same back roads as an adult, I'll hit a stretch where the air feels the same way it did that night. Heavy, quiet, too still, and each time I get that same cold feeling in my chest, like I did when I was lying on the floor of that car, watching the world outside turn white and then vanish. I don't know what chased us out there. I don't know what passed over us in that beam of light. But I know something did. Something real. Something I still can't explain. And every time I end up driving those old roads again, I can't help but glance at the mirror more than I should, half expecting to see those lights rising behind me once more. I drive a commercial vehicle for a living, and most days on the road feel the same. Long stretches of highway, the steady hum of the engine under me, the weight of the hazmat cargo sitting in the back of my 8-ton truck, and the constant awareness that one small mistake can turn into something deadly. You learn to respect the road and the people on it, especially the semi-drivers. Those guys deal with blind spots big enough to swallow a compact car, trailers that swing like bad moods, and brakes that don't forgive stupidity. I always try to give them space, help them merge, block off impatient cars. All the small things that make the highway feel more like teamwork and less like survival. That morning didn't feel any different at first. I had a delivery to make 2 states over, and the air was cold enough to keep me alert. The road ahead was open except for a semi in the right lane. I wasn't in a hurry, but I was keeping a steady pace. As I got closer to him, I saw he was riding the pickup in front of him so hard, it looked like he was trying to push it down the road. The distance was so small it made my stomach tighten. I eased into the left lane to pass and pull ahead to safer space. As I pulled up beside the cab, I glanced over like I always do, just to get a sense of the driver. What I saw made me feel that first quick jolt of unease. He wasn't looking at the road at all. His head was down, phone lit up in his hand, the thumb scrolling like he was sitting on a couch instead of piloting a weapon-sized machine. I wanted to shake my head, but I focused forward, keeping my lane steady. Then I felt the shift. The semi started drifting into my lane. No signal, no correction, just sliding straight toward me. The lane was already tight for my truck, and the sight of all that metal drifting closer set off that automatic instinct in my chest. I gave the smallest honk, barely a tap, just enough for him to know I was there. He jerked the wheel back like he'd been caught, but then, to my surprise, he swung right back toward me again. This time it didn't look like drifting. It looked like intent. I gripped the wheel hard and held my line, my heart thudding. I didn't accelerate or brake, just waited for him to settle. Eventually I pulled ahead of him and moved back into the right lane, wanting to put distance between us. I was breathing harder now, trying to let the moment pass, chalk it up to a driver having a bad day or losing control for a second. But he wasn't done. He sped up and cut directly in front of me, his trailer clearing my hood by maybe a foot, and then he slowed down just enough to make it obvious. It was the type of move that could cause a pileup behind me if I overreacted. So I held back, letting him drag the whole situation out of me like a long breath. When the road widened into 3 lanes, I slowed even more just to get room from him. He took off up the middle lane like nothing had happened. For a few miles I didn't see him again. I kept scanning the road ahead, but traffic shifted enough that he disappeared between larger vehicles. My pulse eased back to normal, and for a moment I thought that was the end of it. Just another idiot, nothing more. But the road didn't let it go. About 20 minutes later, I saw him again in my mirror. Same truck, same trailer, same speed that made the other cars part like water. I was in the far right lane again, wanting nothing to do with him. He came up in the middle lane, barreling like he owned the whole stretch of asphalt. As his cab reached level with mine, he jerked the wheel again, whipping his trailer into my lane. It was so sudden and sharp that I didn't even think. I just stomped the brake. My truck dropped speed fast enough that I felt the load in the back shift and press forward. The trailer swung back into his lane, barely missing my front corner. I sat there gripping the wheel, my lungs tight. That second move erased any doubt. He wasn't drifting. He was trying to hit me, and hitting a hazmat truck would have been a nightmare neither of us walked away from. He kept going, never slowing down, never looking back. I let him disappear again, but this time I felt something lingering in the air between us. Not fear exactly, more like a heaviness, the kind that settles over you after someone proves how fragile your life really is. The rest of the drive felt wrong. Every semi I passed made my shoulders tense, even though none of them drove like he did. My mind kept replaying the way his trailer had swung into my lane with that deliberate snap, the way he never hesitated, never checked his mirror, never acknowledged anything but whatever anger or pettiness had taken over his mind in that moment. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't supernatural. It was just a human being deciding that someone else's life wasn't worth the few seconds of his pride. By the time I reached my delivery site, I realized my hands were still shaking. Not badly, but enough to feel the leftover adrenaline. I parked, walked inside, signed the paperwork, went through the motions like I'd done 1,000 times. But my head wasn't really there. It was still on the road with that semi. Sometimes people talk about scary things like ghosts or monsters or shadows in the night. But the truth is that the scariest moments come from real people who don't care if they hurt you. People who let anger or impatience turn into something dangerous without thinking twice. That day didn't end with a crash or an explosion or a chase. It ended with me pulling into a quiet lot and letting out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for hours. It ended with the knowledge that I had been one bad second away from being crushed under a moving wall of steel, because someone didn't like that I tapped my horn. I finished the delivery. I climbed back into my truck and sat for a moment with the engine off. There was nothing dramatic waiting for me on the next drive, but I knew I'd be watching the mirrors more closely, not because of ghosts or creatures or anything supernatural. Just because out there on the highway, the most dangerous thing you can meet is another person who decides your life doesn't matter. And the worst part is, they look just like everyone else. I lived in a rural part of the UK for a couple of years after uni, working random temp jobs while trying to figure out what I wanted to do. One of those jobs was at a remote castle that sat in the middle of open moorland, miles from the nearest village. The place felt ancient in a way that never really sat right with me. It was beautiful during the day, but once the sun dropped behind the hills, the whole area turned into this dark, empty world where the only lights were the ones you brought with you. Most nights I left late, driving home in silence with nothing but the hum of the engine and the sound of wind scraping at the car. I got used to it eventually, or at least I thought I did. One night it was around 2 in the morning, and I was already tired before I even got into the car. The sky was black, the kind of black that feels heavy, like a lid on the whole world. The moor stretched out in every direction, just heather, tall grass, and rolling hills disappearing into darkness. The castle road wasn't really a road, the more like a strip of broken tarmac that twisted and dipped without warning. I knew the path well enough to drive it half asleep, which is probably why the thing that happened next hit me so hard. I came over this small rise in the road, expecting nothing but more empty moorland, and instead my headlights caught several shapes standing directly in front of me. Pale shapes, all clustered together. At first I couldn't even process what I was seeing. My body reacted before my brain did. I slammed the brakes so hard everything in the passenger seat flew onto the floor. For a moment I just sat there, gripping the wheel with my heart pounding in my throat. I really thought I was about to crash into something alive. When the car finally stopped and the panic eased a little, I realized it was a herd of ponies. Just ponies. They were standing in the middle of the road like they owned it. Some were looking at me, some had their heads down, and all of them were completely unfazed by the fact that a car had almost plowed straight into them. My legs were shaking even though I was still sitting down. The whole scene felt unreal. The road was so dark that everything outside the beams of my headlights dissolved into nothing. These ponies just stood there, staring, shadows sliding over their bodies as they shifted around. It felt like I had driven into a dream. I remember breathing shallow, telling myself to calm down, even though my hands wouldn't stop trembling. They eventually wandered off at their own pace, slow and lazy, leaving me alone again in the dark. I drove home with that adrenaline still in my blood, taking every bend like something else might appear next. The second incident happened a few weeks later, again after a late shift. It was raining hard that night, the kind of rain that makes it difficult to see even with your wipers on full speed. The road I took that night was narrower than the moor road, lined with stone walls and hedges that felt like they were closing in when the weather got bad. I had to drive slower than usual because the water was pooling across the tarmac, and every now and then the tires would slide for a second. My headlights struggled to cut through the rain, and the darkness ahead looked like a solid wall. After a few miles, something started to look wrong. The road looked like it was moving. Not shimmering from rain, not blurring from the headlights, but actually shifting. At first I thought I was tired again. Maybe my eyes were playing tricks on me. But the closer I got, the more obvious it became that the road ahead was covered in small shapes. Hundreds of them. I slowed down to a crawl, then stopped completely when I finally realized what they were. Frogs. The road was absolutely packed with them. They were covering the tarmac like a living carpet, hopping over each other, splashing in puddles, climbing onto the white lines. It was one of the strangest things I had ever seen. I sat there for a moment, engine idling, wondering what the hell I was supposed to do. There was no way I could drive through them without crushing a bunch of them. The idea of that made my stomach turn. So I did something stupid. I put the car in park, got out, and started picking them up. One by one at first, then in handfuls, tossing them gently over the hedge in the direction where I assumed there was a field. The rain soaked through my clothes almost instantly. My shoes slipped in the mud. Every time I turned back to the road, it felt like more frogs had appeared, like I wasn't making any progress at all. The beams from my headlights made the whole scene look even worse. The frogs glistened and moved and piled over each other. It was like standing in the middle of something alive. At some point a car came from the other direction. I didn't even notice it until its lights stopped a few meters away from me. I can't imagine what I looked like to the driver. Just a soaked, half-mad figure hurling frogs over a hedge in the middle of the night on an empty country road. The other car didn't move, didn't honk, didn't do anything. It just sat there while I kept working. After a while the frogs finally thinned out enough that I could get back in my car and slowly roll past the rest without hitting them. The other car turned around before I could even check who was in it. The third incident was the one that stuck with me the most, even though it was technically the least dangerous. It was late afternoon turning into evening, and I was driving a quieter back road that cut through some woods on the way home. The sky was fading, that strange blue, gray color that never seems to last long. The road was empty and I was lost in my own thoughts. As I turned around a curve, my headlights caught something pale on the side of the road. For a second I thought it was an animal. Then it stood up. It was a man. A completely naked man, walking along the verge like he was out for a peaceful evening stroll. The light hit his skin and made him look almost unreal. His hair was plastered to his head, and his arms were swinging casually, his whole body moving like he didn't have a single care in the world. It took me a few seconds to understand what I was seeing. There was no house nearby, no campsite, no car, nothing. Just trees, dirt, and a naked stranger walking with his bits swinging in the breeze. I drove past him fast, heart pounding in my ears, hands gripping the wheel so hard my knuckles went white. I didn't look in the mirror. I didn't want to know if he had turned around. I didn't want to think about where he had come from, or where he was going. All these moments happened months apart, but they stuck with me. Not because they were supernatural or unbelievable, but because they were the kinds of things you don't expect when you're alone on dark rural roads. The ponies, the frogs, the naked rambler, all of it reminded me that the countryside can be strange and unpredictable in ways that have nothing to do with ghosts. There's something unsettling about being alone in a place that feels empty, only for it to suddenly not be empty at all. Each time it happened, I felt that same cold rush in my chest, that same feeling of being small in a world that stretches far beyond what I can see. Eventually, I stopped working at the castle and moved back toward more populated areas. Streetlights, Neighbors' noise, all the things I used to think were annoying suddenly felt comforting. I still remember those late, night drives though. Those dark roads. Those strange encounters that happened without warning. They didn't change my life in some dramatic way, but they made me realize how thin the line is between calm and fear when you're alone in the middle of nowhere. And even now, years later, when I drive at night, there's always a part of me that expects something to appear in the headlights again, standing there in the middle of the road, waiting for me to find it.